Okay guys, medieval peasants, Japan and Europe. Let's start with a joke. What do you get when you cross a duck with a vampire? British people might be thinking of a different answer here. Tell me if you were thinking of the answer I was thinking of, but it's Count Quackula. I really hate that joke because we all know that if you mix a vampire and a duck, you get Count Duckula, which is one of the best cartoons there's ever been on the planet. So,
in the heart of Transylvania, in the Vampire Hall of Fame, yeah, there's not a vampire any other. We won't bite.
okay, medieval peasants. Now, hopefully this video will lead into Nick from the Shogunate doing a video connecting where Ashigaru and peasants come together, which is, I hope I've understood what he's asking me to do. We're going to try and connect there, that difference between samurai, Ashigaru, peasants, and we're going to get, of course, Scott from Sengoku Studies, and hopefully we'll have Stefan from Japan at War and Stephen Nojiri. Now, medieval peasants, okay? You think you know it. There's a guy carrying a cloth on his back. He's got no teeth. He's got a strange hat on. He's dripping in mud and he works all the time until he gets either executed and tortured or he's worked to death in the mines. Absolute nonsense, total nonsense. And even the word peasant is not as old as that. And actually peasants, some of them could read. We had the idea that many of them worked far less days than we work today. We are closer to medieval peasants than they are. They worked far less than we did. There was lots of religious holidays and lots of time off for them. And also, yes, they didn't have the sanitation we have. They didn't have all of that. Everybody knows we moved on. But they had, just because it's a hard life doesn't mean it's a bad life, which was a quote I saw on the internet, which I thought was really good. And you see today farming programs and people enjoy the agricultural year with lots of festivals. But of course, you have high mortality rates and not the best justice system in the world if you happen to be caught by the long arm of the law. To be honest, it's not even that good today either. So, but what about Japan? So, sorry, going back to Europe first, the peasants are not called peasants. They're actually divided into certain classes all the way back to Viking times, guys. Back in the Viking days, you had slavery galore. Everybody goes on about the Atlantic slave trade. The Viking slave trade is massive, and they were hammering the whites from all over Europe. It was like the Vikings are coming. Get the lads in the chains and they pull them off. Not only that, the Romans are coming in. There's always been hierarchy right from the beginning, and there's always been slavery right from the beginning of sort of organized society, and we see this go right back. Now, the problem here is there's something called the Disney trap and there's something called the hammer horror hardships, which is, I like to call them, because we all imagine the Disney trap peasant and the merchant and the evil lord and the bold knight, but we also have the hammer horror, like the peasants are in the field down below, the castle's on the hill, and oh my god, the evil lord is going to kill us. Those are stereotypes. They're not archetypes per se, but they're stereotypes, and some of them are true, especially in Japanese culture, but they're not always true all of the time. So let's quickly divide the Japanese into their 4 classes. Now, I want to warn you here, these 4 classes are mainly Edo period, right? These do go back into the Sengoku period, but I'm hopefully going to leave either Nick, Scott, Stephen or Stefan to help answer this. But we know definitely by a certain point we get the Shi warriors, which is actually the kanji for Chinese kanji for gentry, the gentry. We get no farmers, we get artisans and craftsmen, which are called ko, and then we get sho, merchants, okay? Now, merchants are considered the lowest. However, so that's from the Book of Bushido. However, there are other angles to this. Now, I've done this in the book, which is Samurai and Ninja, and I put this in a long time ago. And basically, there's your samurai, farmers, craftsmen, merchants. We also got the emperor and the imperial family and the court above that. And you also get outcasts who are not. They're called etahinin, right, in Japanese, which basically is a negative word now to say like the low-born, slavey, outcast people. And you also get men of the cloth. Now, where men of the cloth come is very difficult to debate, because some of them are ex-samurai, some of the oldest sons, so have been sent to monasteries. So you start to ask, where do men of the cloth start? Now, we know some old Jesuits turned up in the 1500s and they're chatting to Nobunaga, and one of the priests, abbots, or whatever you want to call them, he was so angry he decided to try and chop off the head of one of the Jesuits to see where this so-called soul is inside, this Christian soul that they keep going on about, and Nobunaga and all the lads are having to restrain him, and this priest, so he must have a high-ranking aspect, but that doesn't mean all priests were high-ranking. You get the local shrine maidens walking around, or the little lad helping out with the wood, as a trainee novice. There's a massive hierarchy going side by side, if you will. The hierarchy of the people in the samurai, including the hierarchy of the people in monasteries and things like that. And I assume that's the same for Europe as well. So we've got to get away from this idea that basically, we've got to get away from this idea that there's peasants and there's, the people at the top. And what you've got to do is start to stratify society down to slaves. There was slavery in Japan. That's something I'd like to go into more, the slavery in Japan that happened there. There was also then so for example, examples of things you could do as a peasant inside a samurai household was be the sandal bearer. So when a samurai needs his new sandals, he's got a little lad there who gives him new sandals, and he carries some on his waist, and there the airs. Then you get the groom who's looking after the horse, and he's leading the horse. You also get these come under the sort of word genin, low people, yeah. But you also get side assistants, and then you get into the sort of not samurai but men at arms, which then leads you into the ashigaru. Now I don't actually believe ashigaru are part of the samurai class, but I do think it's a grey area. We know that in the Iga rules for when Nobunaga was going to invade, that they do say if any ashigaru does well, we'll promote him to samurai, showing that there's a distinct difference between ashigaru and samurai. But there's also our own debatable differences. Is a samurai, a samurai is a hereditary thing, or you could be made samurai. There are different ways to do it, but it is a warrior who really doesn't have to do that much beyond be a warrior. But then that starts to get actually broken down when you look into it, and the idea that they actually do have separate jobs. Some are astrologers, some are linguists, they deal with accounts, and they do have extra jobs even in the Sengoku period besides being a warrior. But ashigaru themselves sometimes, I think in later times, actually branched into being permanent warriors. So what's the difference between a permanent samurai and a permanent ashigaru beyond whatever they own? Because then you've got the idea of ronin, and what's the difference between ronin and ashigaru? And then Stephen Nojiri comes up with a good point. If you listen to one of Stephen Nojiri's recent videos, he talks about how actually some ronin or some people of samurai status would hire themselves out as ashigaru in armies to get employment, because it's better than starving on the side and having nothing. But a samurai would go and become ashigaru within an army because they're hired semi-permanently for the warring season, if you like, and then they come back and they don't lose their status. They're not suddenly not that, but at the same time other samurai getting dropped to half samurai. So there's this really misty moment in between samurai, ashigaru and peasant, where are they or are they not? And that doesn't mean that the peasants in Japan were, as I say, without money. So Toyotomi Hideyoshi actually banned the wearing of swords, 2 swords, by peasants. And this, I've harped on about this in 100 videos. It is crazy to think that back in the day, back in the late Sengoku period, people would walk around with 2 swords like samurai. In fact, that wasn't a thing about samurai. Because remember, if you map it over with the other stuff we've been talking about, samurai are not that distinct. You can drop out of being a samurai, go be an ashigaru for a while. You can then get hired up as a samurai somewhere else. You might have land ownership. You might go as a mercenary around. There's this real movement between the classes that isn't really fixed till later on. And part of that fixing, that anchoring in place, is Hideyoshi and other people's sword bans, getting rid of the peasants with the swords, because these guys could create armies. There are entire things called like the ikis we've talked about, which are groups of people coming together for a common reason. And these are not always just peasants, like Stephen Nojiri says. They are literally led by samurai. Samurai can come in. You can hire samurai. You've got ronin everywhere. You've got military, monastic military orders like the Knights Templar and the Hospitallers. They are monk warriors, and these are bastards. They're really horrible people, some of them, who were going out hunting humans for fun. And that's part of the, I talk about it in the book of Bushido. They talk about how there's references to them going out just taking heads for fun, because like that's what priests would do when they're bored, but they won't eat an animal because they're vegetarians, and you're just like, what the bloody hell, you know, but let's go murder some people. And you get this real strange crossover. Now, I couldn't my personal knowledge doesn't go back enough to tell you about the early Sengoku period and before that about peasants in that time, but we do know that this freedom enjoyed by many people down here is bit by bit in the late 1500s hammered out until it's hammered totally out, and then you get the Tokugawa take control and the peasants are fixed and everything is fixed. That doesn't mean in the Sengoku period you walked around and everybody was like doing whatever they want. We do definitely have court life, samurai life, peasant life, but maybe there's a fluidity like snakes and ladders between them all going around. Yeah, that's basically what's happening, and there is movement and people are moving up. Toyotomi Hideyoshi moves up and there are people falling down, and some of the Jesuit reports say some of the greatest men in Japan just fall to peasants because they've got nothing. So if you're going to learn anything from this video, peasants is a word that is just it's not a modern word. It comes around in the 1500s and it does mean what it means, but it's not that they had some guys dressed in brown sackcloth walking around. People in the peasant times, they are merchants. Some of them are profiting loads. So a peasant, right, actually could own a ship and have that ship trading as a merchant with China, taking Japanese swords over to the Chinese mainland, trading, bringing cloths back, bringing priests back, and he's creaming the cash, living in a gorgeous house, enjoying himself. But he's not part of the gentry. He's not part of those landowning warrior class sort of, you know, those people who get into a warrior society. Because remember, Japan is based on warrior societies. So that means that the warriors are sort of like running the show, but there's lots of powerful people coming down, and the samurai start lending money off them, and they're not interested in money, but they lend it, and then it starts becoming, is it usury, where they start speculating on money, and all of these things come together until you then start to get the peasants being quashed down, the samurai becoming poor, and the merchants rising to the top, becoming like institutional banks, if you like, with the lending to the samurai. Monasteries are lending money. Monasteries are getting money in from, you know, religious beliefs and all that. And all of this mixture comes together. And as I said, eventually it gets focused and stretched and hammered out into this. Now, I'm going to call it there. So hopefully this is just the opening video. I know it doesn't give you solid information, but this is the opening video for you to then go and understand Nick's video from the Shogunate, which will be up within February. Of course, Scott from Sengoku Studies, his will be for the end of February. And I'm hoping Stephen Nojiri and Stefan from Japan at War will also join in this conversation. And they'll start to put some more concrete pieces together for you. And with obviously better editing than I've got, because you guys know I'm actually trying to build a house at the minute. So I have to do these things in between. I was actually moving bricks and shingle this morning. I've got to go back out this afternoon. So I'm sorry for the lack of detail and information. But what I can do is leave you with the most awesome of jokes. What do you get when you cross a dog with a rooster? A cock-a-poodle-doo. Should we get rid of that one? That's a rubbish one. Okay. What is a sea monster's favourite food? Fish and chips. Okay, you'll have that one.